the thing with skill movement, let's take a golf swing
Mhm.
or a baseball throw, whatever, or sprinting. Speed masks weaknesses. I mean, when you go fast, sometimes you can bypass weak points, you can overcome a sticking point or whatever. You can, but when you look at the movement slowly, like, dude, what's happening there, right? I mean, if you are truly skilled at an exercise, at a movement, you should be able to do it at any velocity.
That was Christian Thibaudeau, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. It's great to have Christian Thibaudeau back on the show. Christian is a legend in the world of strength and human performance. He's worked with athletes from nearly 30 sports, has authored multiple books, as well as being a prolific writer for T Nation. Today's episode centers on training with isometrics, one's body weight, and at multiple velocities of movement for athletic adaptation. It's always great talking to Christian. He's an absolute wealth of knowledge. Let's get on to the show. Christian, it's awesome to have you back on the show, man. I know every year, I think the amount of questions I could ask you continues to grow. So it's fun to put all this together. I'm excited to talk today.
Well, it's good timing. It's good timing because it's funny because the way the world works. I've been reviewing a lot of your stuff, of Dan's stuff and Chris's stuff. So what comes around goes around, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully it'll spark some good conversation. Yep. Like I was just saying with you, I with a lot of like the strength phases I'm writing, I find myself going back to the neurotyping course, the booklet that came with it, and it's like, okay, here's neuro heavy, here's all the set rep schemes and weights, here's muscular, here's neuromuscular, and I'm just like, there's so much good stuff there. I'm always searching that for ideas. So I was just doing that not too long, like really this past month.
It's funny because I sometimes go back to reading my old books because it's stuff like not that I forgot about them, but when you have you work with so many different concepts, sometimes some of your best concepts, those that you were using earlier on, kind of like get dropped by the wayside. So it's nice to refresh what you did earlier and try to reincorporate them in your, let's say, newer paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah, I like going occasionally through. Sometimes when I finish a project, like I don't even want to look at it for like 6 months. And then I'll just because it's so much effort to, get it out there. And then I'll go back to it and I was like, wow, this was really good. Or maybe, hey, I would change this thing, but this thing I was doing, I'm not, I was thinking about that back then. That's amazing. Sometimes I don't give my former self. Sometimes I'm real hard on my former self. And so, yeah, it's cool to be able to do that. And one of the things, that I wanted to ask you about, I saw you had a new product or course or educational piece out on like ISO holds, I think like longer ISO holds and things like that. And it got me thinking because I saw a way, like typically like an extreme ISO, like Jay Schrader, right? Like hold a lunge 5 minutes or something. And you had a way of doing that where you do a set and then after the last rep, you finish with the hold, like, right, combining. And so one time this was when I was 17 and I was in my basement and it was just me. And I had it wasn't even a squat rack. It was like the bench of a bench press that went up 3 extra notches and you could maybe use it to squat. So I was trying to squat on that, no spotter. I got stapled on my squat and I'm sitting there at the bottom. So right, like stretch, like extreme stretch. And this is honestly super embarrassing. I had to yell. I think my mom was upstairs. I'm like, hey mom, like I'm stuck under the bar. And then she kind of helped me, get the bar off. We kind of clanked it on the floor. I don't even know exactly what happened, but I stood up and I was like, wow, my hamstrings and adductors and my legs feel worked in a very unique way that I would not have gotten if I just did a set of 12 or something. It was like this long stretch hold. And so I just thought it was really cool. So anyways, gateway to some of your experience and maybe just moving beyond just, hey, just hold this stretch, but actually mixing it with other mechanisms.
And also what happens while you're holding the stretch. I
Yeah.
mean, because people who are familiar with Jay's work, and obviously also being used by to some extent by Dan and Chris and Ben Prentice, is actually because there's no movement. You think that all isometrics are the same. Really, what you're doing is you're actually trying to contract some muscles
Hmm.
while holding the position. And I see two classes of long duration ISOs in that regard. The first one would be contracting the antagonist muscles, which is the way Jay does it. So basically, you are using the antagonist muscle to pull yourself into a deeper stretch. Essentially, what you get is you have what's called a co-contraction of the agonist because they are holding you up, and the antagonists, which are firing to pull you down. And to me, that is extremely valuable for an athlete. Okay, but there's another form of long duration ISOs is to contract the muscle you are trying to lengthen, which is the opposite. So, for example, when you do, let's say, an extreme ISO push-ups, instead of using your back to pull yourself further down, what you do is you go in the lowest position you can hold. And from that position, just try to push yourself maybe like a quarter of an inch just to
Hmm.
activate the pressing muscle, right? And then you try to maintain that tension. Now both externally looks exactly the same. But internally, you have two different things happening. The J's version, the extreme ISOs, I believe is better for athletic performance, injury prevention, motor control, and so on and so forth. But the benefit of contracting the muscle you're trying to lengthen is probably more beneficial in terms of hypertrophy
Hmm.
and as well as building the tendons of the muscle involved. So to me, there's a benefit in doing both. I prefer to call the version I'm doing like long duration ISOs, which is what Ben Prentice also calls them, and the extreme ISO, which would be contracting the antagonist to further the stretch, would be the J's version. So I use both in my training.
Yeah, how does that fit with because with Jay's stuff it makes me think about Charles Atlas's dynamic tension from back in the day. And
Mm.
it's like I almost like feel like I should have that manual. I'm trying to build out like old books on my bookshelf, like a section where it's like anything before 1990 or 2000. It's
That's
like
definitely something that I recommend. I mean, and especially now online, you can download so many of those in PDF format.
yeah.
And it's funny how many things you think are new
Hmm.
are actually like more than a century old.
Oh yeah.
I remember reading like a book from the 1800s, and you see the guy doing a floor press. So floor press is not invented by Westside Barbell.
Mm.
It was done in the 1800s because they did not have a bench.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so, and yeah, dynamic tension. Also, the courses by Joe Arco, not Joe Arco, but it's one about muscle control.
Is it like Maxic? I know that was a question
Yeah,
actually I
yeah,
had for
yeah,
you. Yeah.
exactly. Max it,
Yeah.
yes. So that also fits the bill because you're trying to contract your muscle by using your own body as resistance. So it's a form of isometric training. And I believe that it is very valuable, especially in the earlier stage of training, because I strongly believe that, especially when it comes to motor learning and maybe hypertrophy, the better you are at creating tension in the proper muscle, the better results you'll get. And that's something that's sadly lacking in young kids nowadays because their motor experience is much lower, especially against high resistance, than it was back when people were doing far more, back when doing
Hmm.
physical work. Because now the thing is with specialization is that you're going to have kids who might, because of their training experience, sport experience, have a few muscles, maybe like legs and I don't know, maybe something like biceps, whatever, uh, with which they have a very good capacity to create tension.
Hmm.
And these muscles respond very easily to training. Then you can have those muscles that they have very little experience training or contracting, under significant load, and it takes years for them to pick that up, to be able to train those muscles as efficiently as others. Now, if you can tell me, well, I'm an athlete, I'm not a bodybuilder. It doesn't really matter to me if I'm get jacked or not. Sure. But if you're doing a movement that involves several muscles and you are not skilled at creating tension in some muscles and you are in some others, then that's going to create an imbalance when you are moving, and performance cannot be optimal. So I believe that motor control, and I go back to when I was a kid, right? Sometimes you just go back to what did I do that actually helped me become what I am today. And I remember that, and that's super embarrassing, but also it tells a lot. Is that because I have a low level of self-esteem, which we talked about in the past, um, I always use my physical appearance as a way to boost my self-esteem back up. So, for example, when I was a kid, I remember I must have been like no older than 12. And we went to a resort, to the pool, and probably I want to say 10 minutes, I would go in the bathroom to get a pump. So, but I do isometric chest presses like this. I would do isometric biceps. I would squeeze my glutes, and I believe that it really helped me become better at contracting those muscles, which led to better response, which probably helped even in sports like weightlifting. Because the better you are at controlling your body, the better you are at
Yeah.
moving, achieving different position, and maintaining certain position.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that because I had Mac what is it? I keep forgetting Maxic. I keep wanting to say Maxilding because that was the system. It
Yeah.
was like Max and somebody else. But I'm glad you mentioned that because it really fits well with that question. I just kind of wanted to close out a bit on the isometric piece before I get to that, just because it's interesting, like even how Jay would prescribe the ISOs sometimes, and I do agree with you. I do think it's a little more like you feel more elastic and bouncy after doing the pull down types. But I think a lot of the coaching was a little nebulous. It's like, okay, pull down. Well, if I'm in a push up and I just pull with my back, what might happen? I've seen this happen with a lot of athletes. Is they kind of turn into a W, like the chest actually sinks so much your forearms are no longer perpendicular. You've lost the integrity of the whole system. It just kind of caves in because all you're doing is pulling with your back. Like there has to be.
In the population, you're going to work hard. Swimmers will be the worst for that
Yep.
because they are so mobile in chest
Oh yeah.
and shoulder.
Yeah. So it's almost like if you like, yes, you are pulling, and there is there's the agonist and antagonist, but you also have to stay solid somewhere. And they're also, it's like you're lengthening the chest, but it's under load. And well, how much can those muscles lengthen before it's like, all right, we're done, and the rest of this is just connective tissue? Like there's some of those things, but then the under load is interesting, and I think about this too with okay, like even lifting. Like if we just wanted to take all the noise out of the system, and for athletics, you just made it as simple as you possibly could. And I know like Chris Corfis, like a lot of his sprint training, it's isometrics because it's like the least noisy thing you could possibly do. And once you're in that isometric, yeah, you could lengthen or you could contract against, you could oscillate, you can do these but it's and then you don't have the muscle, the muscle isn't strained in that lift so much in some ways. I think the nervous system, but then you go strain your muscle when you're actually not strained, but like work the muscles when you're actually sprinting, optimize everything in the ISO and go back and forth. So it's interesting to think about, an athletic development in light of maybe starting with ISOs first, and what are the different ways that we could work with that, especially with like speed. I think is where it really could become more polarized versus like football or rugby, where you're running into people and you need muscle mass and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's less motor precision involved in sports like rugby, like football, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. I mean, sure, we want to learn optimal running technique, but the perfect sprinting mechanics that you're using for, let's say, 100-meter or 60-meter sprint is never going to be found on the football field. First of all, just because of the equipment, also
Yeah.
because, well, there's people running after you, so that changes everything. But it is the way I see it is kind of like with CrossFit. When I work with CrossFit athletes, I often work with the Olympic lifts. Okay.
Mm.
And my belief was well, but during a WOD, you're not going to have perfect technique. So why train perfect technique? Well, because the best your technique is, the more leeway you have when you're going for maximum speed,
Mm.
that even if you have a 10, 15, 20% degradation in technical efficiency, it's still much better than someone without your technical
Mhm.
efficiency or proficiency. So the risk of injury is lower, and you can also be more efficient in your movement, just be wasting less energy. But yeah, so that I think that what's really important with isometrics, because it has. It's funny you mentioned that, because this morning, I did shoot a section on the benefits of isometrics for anti-aging. Okay,
Mm.
and I believe that for the older population, and we can even include the older athlete population, they have benefits that, well, they are beneficial for everybody. But I think that the older you get, the more beneficial they
Mm.
are, because some of the adaptations counter bad
Mm.
stuff that happens as you're
Mm.
getting older. So, for example, we know that as you're getting older, you will lose sarcomeres in series. That's just a fact. That's why your muscles shorten, and you
Mm.
lose range of motion. You lose active range of motion. You get more risk of injuries. But we also know that long duration isometrics increase the number of sarcomeres in
Mm.
series. So that counters one of the negative things that happen with aging, that happens as early as your early 30s. It also is one of the best way to strengthen tendons,
Mm.
uh, because tendons, to be strengthened, to be built, because we know that during a regular exercise, let's say dynamic exercise, eccentric, concentric, um, the muscle, you will probably build 5 times more muscle than tendons,
Mhm.
roughly that. So after years of just focusing on regular lifting, you're going to have a severe imbalance in muscle versus tendons, which leads to what we see nowadays with all those Achilles and
Mhm.
all those other tendon injuries. So when you look at the way tendons are built, you need a sustained force production to be able
Mm.
to stimulate those tendons. The longer you can sustain a high level of force or a level of tension continuously, the better you're going to build tendons. That's why isometric, especially long duration isometrics, are uniquely designed
Mm.
to build tendons, which is also something that you get brittle tendons as you're getting older. You actually increase the amount of collagen, but you lose elastin,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
you lose the integrity of the tissue. So I think that, again, long duration isometrics is something that's going to be very, very positive to prevent the decrease in tendon performance with older athletes, also reducing obviously the risk of injury, and finally, well, it does address the mobility issue, which also is lost as you're getting older. So to me, I think that isometrics, just because they do so many things at the same time, and are so beneficial for older athletes, I think that sure, as your initiation to training, you should probably include some isometrics. I would say probably some combination of very high intensity overcoming isometrics to develop the nervous system, be able to send a stronger neural drive to the muscles, but and also a small amount of long duration isos to train position, to
Mm.
train motor control, etc. But as you're getting older, you want to increase the ratio, I think, of
Mm.
isometrics versus dynamic lifting.
Mm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, especially, yeah, with like the elastin. And honestly, too, I remember when I was, maybe I was 34. I don't remember. It was somewhere in my mid 30s. And I remember I just did a block where I think it was a 3-day almost thing. Maybe it was 4 days a week, but I know I did 2 sessions with extreme ISO, like Jay Schrader style, 2 extreme slows where it's basically like that. You just start higher and then you end up in the stretch range. And then I think a couple days I did like a 1 by 12 to maybe 1 by 12, just a single set of like some.
Just stay sane.
Yeah, and then after 3 weeks, not long, like just a short period of time, I remember going and testing my running jump, and
Mm.
it went up like 2.5 inches, and it just felt like this bounce. I was like, ooh. something good happened here. Something.
It's probably tendons. It's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
it's stiffness. Be able to maintain stiffness. Maybe there's something about fast twitch fibers. Also, we know we lose as we're getting older is the ratio of fast twitch fibers. So we want to include that work that maintains fast twitch fibers at the lowest possible cost. And again, isometrics fit the bill pretty well. One thing that people don't understand is that even if you're not moving, isometrics are actually a very high speed contraction. When we talk about the speed of the muscle fiber firing, okay, because that's what's important, not movement speed. It's how fast your muscle fiber can twitch. That's what determines if a method will make you more explosive or not. And that's why isometrics, especially if you voluntarily try to create maximum tension and sustain it, that's going to be a fast twitch method because of the oxygen deprivation that we talked about in the previous podcast, but also because to maintain those positions, there will always be, even if you try to be, and you've done those, I've done those, if you hold a position 3 minutes, there will be micro oscillation. It's never fully stable. If you film yourself and really look at movement, there is always a fluctuation in position. But these are micro oscillation, and that's adaptive movement. That's the only way that the body can sustain those effort. But those micro oscillation requires micro adjustment, and micro adjustment can only be made with very, very fast muscle contractions because you don't even notice them.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the exact number. I think it was something like 12 firing cycles per second during isometric. So that's pretty high speed.
Yeah, it makes me, I think sometimes about like what's the most like a natural, I guess for lack of a better term, ways to move. Like I guess you move like a caveman. You're doing all like just typical natural human things, and then once you get to lifting, well, I mean, like you said, even with the floor press, right? Like we invented the bench and the back on the bench, and there's been things that and I think barbells are one of the greatest inventions of modern time. They're amazing, right? But like, it's interesting to think about, like, okay, if I sprint, everything in that sprint is built in balance with the body. Or if I'm dragging a carcass backwards through the woods, like there's a lot of things being built in balance versus you could just, if all I did was barbell bench press, there are things that will become out of balance. And I guess no matter what you do, that can be true. That's the truth.
Yeah, that's why in the past, what we've done is to counterbalance that, we include as many regime of contraction as we could. Like we use plyometrics exercises to compensate. We often say that the plyometric is a bridge between strength training and speed training. That's not exactly what happens, but it kind of, what happens is, like when you do strength training, you have some positives that happen when it comes to speed. Specifically, you increasing the strength of the neural drive, which gives you the potential for faster contraction. You do increase the size of the muscle, which up to a point can help. I say up to a point because as long as the pennation angle changes too much and it gets slower, the tendon gets stronger, which actually can store more elastic energy, so that gives you more potential for speed. But also, many bad things happen. First of all, the contraction type, the type of neural drive, the type of contraction is not the same between explosive and slow speed. Like high tension is monophasic. You have like one sustained activation of the agonist with a background co-contraction of the antagonist. Now, depending on how good you are as far as moving or controlling your body, the antagonistic contraction will be higher or lower. Now, the people get much stronger, not because their agonist gets stronger, because the antagonists don't pull as hard against the agonist, because they can create stability just by the contraction of the agonist and synergist. But anyway, it's monophasic. So you're contracting one big contraction of the agonist. Whereas when you're doing explosive work, it's triphasic. You have an initial boost in agonist activation with a relaxation of the antagonist to allow for acceleration. the body will sacrifice stability by reducing co-contraction to promote acceleration. Then once you reach the first peak of acceleration, it will create a boost in antagonist to create stability. So you can have a second, you create some stability to be able to push again and have a second agonist peak. So it's triphasic. So you can be really, really good at explosive action without being good at strength action and vice versa. And if you focus specifically on one type, then you can actually eventually detrain the other one. Okay. So and lastly, when you do strength work, the adaptation to the muscle fibers tend to be toward the intermediate fibers. So your faster
Yeah.
twitch fibers become intermediate
Yeah. In the
by
middle.
nature. Yeah. So the plyometrics can counter that, can reverse that, and sprinting. So sprinting plyometrics can counter some of the bad stuff that happen with strength work, which is why combination of both is obviously in some extent ideal. Or you can use something like, and which I've been using more and more and more, the flywheel training, replacing strength training with athletes. Like, for example, I work with one of the top karate player in the world, like super explosive, like lightning fast, and we don't lift weights. Let me correct myself. The only exercise where we lift weights is a power clean from the hang. Every form of strength work is done with a flywheel, and the rest is plyometric and absorption drills. Because that's only. I'm going to correct myself. We do have one element we train with regular lifting, and it's like the rear delts rhomboid, because when she's striking, she goes so fast that she does need that meat behind her body to be able to absorb that force.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how all those contractions work together. And what I was saying with like, okay, you got the caveman and does all these things, natural movements, but then once you start to get into formal resistance training, my thought was, is isometric training in terms of something that kind of does everything? You know what I'm saying? Like in balance. If all you did was innate organic human movement, maybe you did push pull carries and sprints and all that, and then isos, will you build a body in balance where you don't necessarily need to mix up the things? And I say it in the sense of, I remember Dan John had said something about back in the 60s, like a track coach had said, okay, here's three ingredients. You do your event, maybe it's long jump or the 100. You do a max isometric. I think it was maybe Bob Hoffman era, so probably like a Bob Hoffman style max pull for 5 seconds or whatever, a couple of those. And then you have a magic drill, like some sort of like special strength exercise or special, not strength, but like specialized exercise that complements your event. And those are your three. And I guess the question is, well, okay, if you get your strength from an isometric, be it a max or maybe a max lengthened or something where you're building a muscle and tendon in harmony and it's a balance system, how then do you, looking at, well, okay, well, now we're doing more strength work outside of it. It's interesting to think. And like you said, with the martial artists, it is interesting, like martial arts too. A lot of martial arts, like it's the Marinovich or Sports Science Lab, it seems like it's a lot more body weight oriented in general. There's certainly people who lift, but there's just something about that. So it's my question or thought is, how do you look at, if you had isometrics, like the decision to move beyond it with certain, and I use regular lifting, but it is interesting to think about, okay, if all I had was isos, it'd be an interesting thought experiment. Versus,
when you talk about martial arts, that's a good example, because when you look at traditionally, and when I say traditionally, like Shaolin monks and like even before weight training was popular, martial artists built their strength by holding position. And I've been, because my son does karate, this girl does karate, and I discuss with the old timers at the gym, and even then they discuss what their old timers were doing. And for example, they would take some of the most extreme karate positions. That's a Zenkutsu, which is like kind of like a split jerk position, and they would hold that for 50 minutes. So and they would do lots of holds, lots of like positional holds, kind of like like just holding the key posture in karate. And there's also a technique which is actually being taught at the dojo my kid goes. Um, I don't remember the name, but it's actually doing all the skills voluntarily creating maximum tension. So like you're trying to move, but contracting every single muscle in your body and holding
Hmm.
contract. And you're
Hmm.
actually actively flexing everything as hard as you can. And that's how they build muscle. That's how they build strength. And yet they were super explosive.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, that's not going to give you a Mr. Olympia physique.
Yes. No, it won't. Yeah.
But I do believe, and again, when we go back to Max Holdings, um, I believe that you can build a certain level of muscularity just doing that, and you can certainly develop enough strength for your sport if your sport is body weight oriented.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's the big one is that, yeah, and martial arts, like you mentioned, like that's the extreme example where that exists. And I was thinking too of like the Marinovich training system where most people see it, it's like a lot of discs and ball work and you have the super cat type machines. But I've heard you don't see it in the pool work and all the stuff that's body weight. And pool work kind of too, it's more like a sensory overlay, right? It's like I guess maybe in some way the easiest way to get some more sensation is just jump in the pool and start doing some of that stuff. I mean, maybe it's
That's
subconscious.
what I did for my shoulder.
Mm,
I mean, I would go in, and I did that instinctively because it just felt right.
yeah.
Is that I would go in the pool, I would just go and I put my hand like this and do extra rotation into
Mm.
it as fast as possible, and like that,
Yeah.
and lateral raises and stuff like that. Yeah, and it becomes almost like the iso inertia
Mm.
machine I mentioned earlier. So that's one form, and I believe just with movement and with voluntarily contracting your muscles, putting yourself in certain key position, you can absolutely get. I mean, you're not going to get uh, like Olympic level strength. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to clean and jerk 500 training like that.
Mhm.
But when you look historically, like yes, we talked about martial arts, but wrestlers, that's what they did. They would hold position, or what I remember a manual by Tuneman about physical preparation for wrestlers, and it was essentially just holding position against an opponent.
Hmm.
So the opponent would create pressure in a certain position, which would be your external resistance, and you would hold that resistance for a certain number of time. So I think that historically, people have built high performance machine using mostly positional holds with or without external resistance. And yes, I think that the barbell in some cases is an upgrade, in some cases it's a downgrade. Because one thing to answer your question, one thing I know for sure is that isometrics will not be detrimental. So I mean, the barbell gives you positives that probably can't be gotten with other
Yeah.
tools, but it has side effects that will also not be gotten with other tools. So isometrics much less chances of those bad things happening for an athlete.
Yeah. I love the rest like the martial art history stuff because I find it interesting to go back through training and like I like the story. I'm to me it's just stories. I haven't read like anything more official, but like to get in the dojo, you had to hold a horse stance for 20 minutes, sit outside the front
Yeah,
door.
yeah, that's what they did. That's what they did, and they also did it with like movement. Like one drill that the my one of the sensei at the gym told me was they would take the horse stand position, and then they would hold for like minute and 2 minutes. Then they would just do half moon forward, hold position, 2 minutes,
Mm,
half moon forward, hold position. So essentially, it would take them like 15 minutes just to cross the whole dojo, and they would do that
mm,
once or twice during that was a workout. And that's the one thing that the old timers at the gym were complaining about at the dojo is that because of COVID, they shortened the classes
mm,
from an hour and 50 minutes to 45 minutes. So now they skip the conditioning part.
mm.
So they just do the karate. But they believe that the whole thing was the conditioning part was extremely important because what they did essentially, when you look at it, because I know, because that's what they told me, and I'm still seeing some element of that. It was a combination of two things. Okay, holding positions and jumping,
Hmm.
and of course
Yeah.
striking, which is explosive by nature.
Yeah. It's like a
We have that,
polarity. Yeah.
those two extremes, right?
Yeah, I've become more and more a fan of extremes the longer I've coached, because there's so much confusion. It's like, okay, here's all the things we could do in the middle, but why don't we just start here, and then the middle will start to figure itself,
Yeah.
it'll figure itself
Basically,
out.
if you do the extremes, you're not missing out. Okay,
Yeah.
you might want to have like some of that stuff in the middle for a specific purpose. Like example, the karate girl I mentioned, specifically to make the whole scapular belt stronger, then we
Yeah.
need more hypertrophy work. Um, but that's just to fix specific issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to say too, this is so good because I had that Maxic question, and then so much of this is just like stuff I didn't know with like the martial artist and what you did as a youth, like body control. I just want to touch on a little bit of isometrics and some complexes with isos quickly, and then I'd have a question on that for you. But yeah, I was going to say within
By
the
the way, the name of, I mean, sorry about that, but if you want to, I think that for the super slow movements, okay, with high tension, the name of the sensei who teaches that is Ken Talak,
okay,
Tallack. He comes like 3 or 4 times a week in the dojo. He's like
oh, cool,
he's the sensei of our sensei. So he's the one who teaches the system, which obviously comes from like an older
yeah.
Japanese thing. But
Yeah, I like that. And the more I think about, I read a lot more stuff now that makes me think the older stuff, like older martial arts books. I was reading like Bruce Lee's like Isometric, his training book from whatever it was,
yeah,
1980 something or what. And I look at like what landed in Jay Schrader's system, and just the extreme iso and extreme slow, just those two, something that's slow and controlled, and it's almost like it blends strength with that martial arts feel, that motor control feel. And it's funny how it's so unique in its own sense, but the more I read in the martial arts, those are the things that I feel like the martial arts can deliver to the whole thing, is that just mindful control, because we skip over that so readily for,
the whole nature of martial arts. I mean, and don't forget that martial arts, uh, well, especially those of the karate, kung fu, and family,
mm,
judo, it has evolved over 2 to 3 thousands of
mm,
years, and it was not just a system of combat; it was a system of getting into combat shape.
mm,
So the whole system has evolved over those 2,000 years, even more. So I'm guessing they found a few things that worked. I mean, with
yeah.
all of those experimentations.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it is a thing too where and maybe we can just touch on this now, because maybe we can finish with the isometric complexes. Maybe that'll be a good way to do it. Because yeah, Max, I've mentioned enough times with Maxic, but I bought like the old Maxic book, or one of them. I think he wrote like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting. And sometimes you wonder if what they claimed was true reality, strongmen and like, oh, I do this. Or like, I think Sandow was like all about the little dumbbells, but that was maybe so he could sell them, so he could sell his books or something like that. But Maxic had claimed, and Maxic was like the man. I mean, I don't know what his lifts were. I think he was like clean and jerk 300 something at 160 pounds way back then, when that was like world class. And a lot of his training was just like muscle control, like going inward and being able to do like just manipulations and control of muscles. And it's interesting to think. I will say for a fact, I've worked with a lot of younger athletes who, even more than lacking, I guess, air quotes, strength, because like it's multifactorial, just their ability to control their bodies in very basic, slow, like lunging type patterns or squatting type, anything like that, is you can just tell there isn't a lot of control there. And you wonder, well, how can you build that strength unless there's at least some foundation of control? And then the question is, well, how far should I take this? And I sure, it sounds like martial artists have taken it very far. And so,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You look at any the thing with skill movement. Let's take a golf swing
mhm,
or a baseball throw, whatever, or sprinting. Speed masks weaknesses. Meaning, when you go fast, Sometimes you can bypass weak points, you can overcome a sticking point or whatever. You can, but when you look at the movement slowly, like, dude, what's happening there, right? I mean, if you are truly skilled at an exercise, at a movement, you should be able to do it at any velocity.
Mm.
I mean, I think it was Fred Couple, for example, and that was an example that struck me because Fred Couples had a great swing, and he said, my coach, my former coach, told me that if you cannot pause at the top of a golf swing and hit a perfect golf shot, then you don't know how to swing.
Mm.
So like you rush through it, and because it just used movement to compensate for the fact that you can't hold the position. And you said, hey, dude, holding a top backswing, that's super, super simple. I did that and I just could not hit the ball.
Yeah.
I was a pretty good player. So that stuck with me that, skill is first shown in slow movements. And if you're truly a skilled person at an exercise, you can adjust your movement. And that's a lot more complicated than you think, because you still need to respect the proper sequencing of which muscle is firing first and so on and so forth. But I think that once in a while, if you, for example, golf swing, if you want to improve your golf swing, just once in a while, do a 1 to 3 minutes golf swing.
Mm.
That's going to ingrain that pattern. And then when you go back to fast, it's going to be automatic.
Yeah, to me, yeah, and that's where I've heard most of these ideas. Either like a golf swing. It seems like the easiest implementations are things that involve the hands and something where there's like this longer range. I think something like a sprint. I mean, you could slow down partially, like a sled, a hill, even a lunge is in a way that, because you have a lot of components of the shape of the sprint that are there, and I think those are all ways to do it. My thought is, and this has allowed me to reframe bodybuilding and even machines a little bit, in the sense I think we look at these things, oh, that's not very athletic. And you have the isometric too, but even just thinking about, well, what about just the basic control that's gained? And I even think about this, like I do a lot of rock climbing, and my forearms are just like they're really massive compared to my upper arms. But I've always been a little like that. Like it's like Popeye a little bit, like calves, feet, high jump, like a lot of spring. And for some reason, my arms like to reciprocate that. And so, but I've been working a lot on, well, how do I just get my biceps to work more? But part of it in that journey, I found doing the old school, like the concentration curl where you're like leaning on the bench. But if I let my shoulders relax, just fully stretch, I get such a good bicep. And I'm like, well, why are my shoulders so tight? That's probably holding me back somewhere else. And just that, like a process of, it's actually, it's nice to work the arm, but I'm also like, wow, I get to down regulate all this extra tightness up here. So that's good for me. It's just, and I feel like there's a lot in that muscle control bodybuilding space that can, to a certain degree, can be a good teaching point for a lot of people. I think that maybe get overlooked.
Yeah, man, I think that's something that's sorely lacking in most individuals, the capacity to contract and or relax a muscle while contracting surrounding muscles. I mean, the principles of irradiation is very cool, meaning that, when I'm contracting a muscle, the surrounding muscles will automatically fire, but sometimes it can actually hinder proper movement.
Mm.
So working on the skill of being able to turn on and off some muscle, then that can make a huge difference. And obviously, uh, if you try to do that while you're moving, it's much harder. So you start with when there's no movement, and then gradually you throw in some movement in there.
Yeah. I love that. I love, like, because I remember you were reading Pavel Satslin's Power to the People, and it's like, oh, radiation. And it's like, this is a great thing. It's like, well, yeah, if you need to be forceful and produce max force, yes, it is a good thing. But then, in recent podcasts with Bill Hartman, it's like, well, that also kind of locks joints. They'll have to lock, everything locks to produce force. But what happens if you have to do a nice golf swing? What happens when I throw a football?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, no diss on the guy, because I like him as a person.
Yeah.
Joel Seedman. But when you look the way he trains people, everything is about creating maximum tension all the time.
Yeah.
And when you look at Joel sprint, it's like a robot. And again, he just took one idea that can be useful, but took it too far. Now, what happens is he's lucky enough to work with
Mm.
people who are naturally great movers.
Yeah.
So they already have the capacity to relax when needed.
Mm.
An athlete or a person who does not have that and have tried to apply a system will get slower.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree not to beg on anybody. I never try to speak in the
Yeah.
spirit of that, but if you do watch Joel and you watch his face, it's always like everything is like "Arr," like he's irradiating his neck up into his jaw, and then you watch him sprint and his rib cage doesn't move, and then his
Everything
arms like flip around like crazy because the rib cage isn't moving. So it's just interesting to see how that irradiation eventually works itself into. Yeah,
right.
he's very creative though, very very creative individual.
Yes. And again, there is a lot of things he's doing that will be useful for certain situations.
So real quick, I know we only got a few minutes left. And just to kind of touch on, so back to very quickly, the isometric piece, I think is interesting in the sense of, now being creative, like you mentioned, iso jump. And then you had lifting, like lift, hold, or do your reps and then hold it on the ISO piece. I talked to Alex Natera about, he works in it where he'll do max push ISOs and pair with plyos and stuff like that. So excuse me, for athletes, just quickly, maybe probably only got like 5 minutes, but hopefully we can get it in. Just concepts for athletes if we're looking to start combining these things. We're starting to put it in complexes. Any primers, any thoughts on that mixture?
Well, first, I cannot. Well, I cannot fully take credit for the isometrics after the contraction. Actually, the first person who I've heard do that was Dave Tate. So he would do like a regular set, let's say of double press, and he would end the set with a max duration isometrics. For him, it was mostly for injury prevention and because he has a messed up back and shoulder that really helped him. So say, oh, that's pretty cool because, well, when you think about it first it does prolong the tension time, which gives more mechanical tension. Also, you get the benefits of the loaded stretching, but because you're fatigued, then you probably get them sooner. So you probably don't have to hold the whole 3 minutes. You can probably hold just 1 minute, which is more tolerable for most people. And for the meatheads, well, it gives them the impression, well, I'm doing bodybuilding work. So that
Yeah.
might. And it's funny because I read a great book, and you should look into that. He's not a strength coach per se, but Nick Nielsen
Hmm.
wrote a book called Return to Prime, which essentially is how an older person can get back to like his former self as far as performance is concerned.
Hmm.
Essentially, a system based on long duration isometrics, on overload isometrics, on loaded stretching, and on cluster training. So it's pretty darn cool. And he's the one I've seen who was using those post fatigue
Hmm.
long duration isometrics systemically. So he actually had a formula for you. You start by doing, let's say, 15 reps to create the pre-fatigue. Then you're gonna hold for as long as you can. And when you cannot hold. If you can't hold for longer than, let's say, 30 seconds, you're gonna have a drop set. So you use less weight than you until you reach at 1 to 3 minutes. So to me, I think that it would be a superior, hypertrophy method.
Hmm.
I don't honestly see a method that would be more effective for rapid muscle growth than doing, let's say, a set of, let's say, I would say 6 to 10 reps to failure, depending on your own personal preferences, and then holding for 1 minute loaded stretch.
Hmm.
To me, I don't see how you could make a set more effective than that for muscle growth.
Yeah. And the awareness you get in the hold at the end versus like just repping it out, you actually are aware of, like that being boosted. It's probably less embarrassing than doing a gnarly bench drop set, just ending up with a bar at the end too. So,
Yeah, exactly.
anyways, I know your time is going to be cut off here a second. So we'll finish it up. I appreciate everything, Christian, and I'm excited for our next conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been fun.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. It was great having you here, and I'll see you next week.